They took everything I owned while I was still alive to see it. That was the thought echoing in my mind as I stood in the center of my empty home. The piano, gone. The photos, gone. Even the chair where Thomas used to read the paper had vanished. Sunlight poured through the window onto a clean patch of floor, as if trying to find what my daughter had erased. Lydia had said, "It's time to make life easier for you, Mom." But as I looked around at the silence she left behind, I realized she hadn't made life easier. She'd simply made it hers. My name is Margaret Davis, and I'm 69 years old. You're listening to this from the house on Willow Lane, the one I built my life inside of, and the one my daughter took from me. When people hear my story, they ask the same question. How could your own child do that to you? I've asked myself that too, though not out loud. Maybe because I already know the answer. I looked around at the marks left on the walls, the places where photos once hung. My husband, Thomas, smiling with his hand on my shoulder. Lydia, our daughter, blowing out her 10th birthday candles. Our first Christmas tree. All gone. The nails still stood in place like tiny witnesses who refused to leave. On the table by the window lay a single envelope. I hadn't opened it yet, but I didn't need to. The black seal on top already told me what it was. A court notice. Lydia's name printed bold on the front, mine just below it. I didn't cry. That surprised me. There was a time I would have. But now the tears had all dried up, turned into something sharper, something colder. Outside, a bird landed on the fence, chirping like the world was still normal. I envied that kind of peace. I wanted to tell it, "Nothing is normal anymore, little one. Not when your own child calls your home her property." My fingers traced the edge of the envelope. My hand didn't shake, though inside my heart did. I thought of the piano that once stood right there, how Thomas used to play softly every evening while I cooked dinner. He'd hum to himself, always a little off-key. Lydia would sit beside him, pressing the wrong notes on purpose to make him laugh. He used to say, "As long as this piano plays, this house will always have music." But silence had moved in long before the furniture left. A week ago, Lydia stood right in this room, her voice cheerful as always. "It's just a transfer, Mom," she said, waving the papers in her manicured hand. "You'll still live here, but it'll be safer if I handle the finances. You don't need to worry about all this paperwork at your age." At your age, those 3 words had landed like a soft slap, but I smiled anyway. Mothers learn early how to hide pain behind kindness. I signed where she pointed, trusting her as I always had. Now every signature had erased another piece of my life. The sound of tires crunching outside pulled me from my thoughts. A white delivery van stopped at the curb. The driver looked confused when he checked his clipboard. "Is this 42 Willow Lane?" he called out. "I've got a delivery for a Mrs. Collins." I wanted to laugh. Mrs. Collins, that was my daughter's married name. She had already changed it, on paper at least. The house wasn't even hers for a full month yet. I told the man she didn't live here anymore. He blinked, apologized, and drove off. When the engine faded, the silence returned, heavier this time. I turned toward the window and saw my reflection in the glass, my hair, once dark, now silver. My eyes looked older than I remembered, but they still held a trace of the woman I used to be, the woman who believed family meant safety. I whispered softly, "They forgot who built these walls." It wasn't anger in my voice, but memory. On the floor near the wall, I noticed a tiny scrap of paper, part of a note Lydia had left weeks ago. Half of a sentence still visible. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of everything." And they had. Every plate, every photograph, every piece of the life I'd built, taken care of, right out the door. I bent down, picked it up, and placed it on the table beside the envelope. For a moment, I imagined Thomas sitting there, smiling that calm smile of his. "You always were too trusting, Maggie," he'd say, "but one day they'll learn what patience really is." That word, patience, stayed in my head like a whisper. I walked slowly through the empty rooms one last time. The floor creaked under my slippers. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon soap. My fingers brushed the counter where I used to knead dough every Sunday morning. The echo of laughter from old dinners hung somewhere in the air, like a ghost that refused to leave. When I reached the front door, I stopped. The house looked smaller now, stripped of memory, but I didn't feel small. For the first time in months, I felt awake. I opened the door, and the breeze carried in a soft hum, like the first few notes of Thomas's piano. Maybe it was only my imagination, maybe not. I turned back once more, looked at the sunlight lying where the piano had stood, and whispered, "It's time." Then I picked up the envelope, tucked it under my arm, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, and waiting. Some stories end when the house goes quiet. Mine was just beginning. A year before that empty morning, my house on Willow Lane was full of life, the kind of life that makes you forget how fragile comfort can be. The walls smelled of bread and fresh flowers. My husband, Thomas, had planted rose bushes beneath the windows before he passed. They still bloomed every spring, stretching toward the light like nothing in this world could stop them. I used to tell Lydia that the roses were his way of saying good morning. She would laugh softly and say, "Mom, you really believe that, don't you?" And I'd smile because, yes, I did. That house was more than wood and paint. It was a map of our years together, every mark, every scratch, every photo frame. The piano stood near the living room window, polished to a quiet shine. Even after Thomas died, I dusted it every Sunday. I never learned to play, but it made me feel like he hadn't really left. Some people keep ashes. I kept melodies. My mornings always began the same way. I'd open the curtains, let the light in, and put on the kettle. The air would fill with the smell of coffee and the faint hum of the neighborhood waking up. There was peace in those moments, a kind of stillness you don't recognize until it's gone. Lydia used to visit on weekends with her husband, Eric, and their daughter, Emily. They'd pull into the driveway, music playing from the car, laughter spilling out before the doors even opened. Emily would run straight to me, her arms wide. "Grandma, you made banana bread again," she'd shout, already heading for the kitchen. I'd laugh and hand her a slice before she could ask twice. Lydia was always busy, always talking about work, bills, and how expensive everything had become. I'd listen, nodding along, offering what I could. "You and Eric work hard," I told her once, "but remember, not every burden needs carrying all at once." She smiled in that way daughters do when they think their mothers don't understand. When she looked at me, I sometimes saw a flash of the little girl she used to be, the one who used to curl up beside me on rainy days and ask for one more story before bed. That memory was what made it so easy to keep giving. Every Sunday, I set the table for 5. Even though Thomas was gone, his place was never empty. I still put a plate there, not out of grief but gratitude. It reminded me how much we'd built together. Lydia once teased, "Mom, you're feeding a ghost," and I just smiled. He's earned it. I had always believed in small kindnesses. When Lydia's car broke down, I helped pay for the repair. When Emily's school fees came due, I covered them without being asked. I didn't see it as help. I saw it as love. Family isn't alone, it's shared air. Sometimes, when the house grew quiet at night, I'd talk to Thomas's portrait. It sat on the mantel, his eyes kind as ever. "You'd be proud of her," I whispered one evening after Lydia left. "She's strong, just like you." I didn't see what was coming then. Maybe love really does make you blind. One morning in early spring, Lydia called me while I was in the garden. I still remember the way the sunlight hit the petals, everything glowing gold. "Mom," she said, "Eric and I were thinking, maybe you should think about simplifying things." "Simplifying?" I asked, brushing dirt from my gloves. "You know," she said, her tone bright, almost cheerful. "The house, the upkeep, the bills, you don't need to stress yourself. You should be enjoying your years, not worrying about them." I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Sweetheart, I'm not worrying." "This house is my comfort." There was a pause. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? A few weeks later, she and Eric showed up with folders and documents. "Just paperwork," she said lightly. "We're helping you organize your estate so everything's easier to manage." No rush, just a few signatures. Eric handed me a pen, his smile calm and polished. "It's just future planning." The papers looked harmless, numbers, stamps, and fine print I didn't bother reading. I had never been one for legal things. Thomas had always handled that part. That evening, after they left, I sat by the piano and played one of Thomas's old records. The soft tune filled the room, wrapping around me like a memory. I felt proud of my daughter for growing into someone responsible and capable. I thought about how lucky I was to have family close by. The next weekend, she brought over a new blanket set. "For your guest room," she said. "You'll have company soon, I promise." "Who's coming?" I asked. She just smiled and kissed my cheek. "You'll see." I should have asked more questions, but love makes you trust too quickly. I still remember the last Sunday dinner before everything began to change. The table was full, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and laughter echoing through the walls. Lydia poured wine, Eric told stories about work, and Emily drew pictures of our family. One of her drawings showed me with a heart over my head. She said, "Grandma, this means your love." I folded that drawing and tucked it inside my apron pocket. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I stood by the window watching their car drive away. The porch light flickered, catching the roses outside. The house felt peaceful again, but in the quiet, I felt something small, like a thread loosening. A tiny shift in the air. I brushed it off, told myself it was nothing. But deep down, I think part of me already knew. Peace like that never lasts forever. As I turned out the lights and walked upstairs, I whispered goodnight to Thomas's picture. "They're taking care of me, love," I said softly, "just like we always hoped." The picture didn't answer, but somehow the silence felt heavier than usual. It started so slowly, I almost didn't notice. The kind of change that hides behind smiles and warm dinners. Lydia began visiting more often after that spring, always with something to check on. One week it was the mailbox, the next it was the water heater. "You shouldn't have to worry about these things, Mom," she'd say, looking around like the house had become a burden instead of a home. I would laugh softly, brush the flour off my hands, and tell her, "I've managed fine for 69 years. I'll survive another few." She'd smile, that same sweet daughter's smile, but her eyes had something new in them, something I couldn't name then, concern mixed with calculation. One afternoon, she brought her husband Eric along. He was polite as always, carrying a clipboard and wearing that cologne that smelled too sharp for my little kitchen. He looked around like he was taking mental notes. "Beautiful home," he said, tapping the wall lightly. "Strong beams, but these old houses can get tricky fast. Leaks, maintenance, insurance. It piles up." Lydia added, "We just want you to be safe, Mom. You've had a few dizzy spells lately." I frowned. That was once, months ago. I stood up too fast. Eric smiled gently. "Still, we worry. You live here alone, and we want you to have peace of mind." That phrase, peace of mind, sounded kind. But in their voices it carried a quiet weight, like a door slowly closing. After they left, I sat at the piano bench, running my fingers along the smooth wood. Thomas used to say people mean well until money teaches them otherwise. I didn't think my daughter could ever prove him right. The next few weeks, she began dropping small hints over the phone. "You know, Mom, assisted living these days isn't like before," she'd say casually. "They have activities, gardens, even movie nights." I'd laugh and say, "I already have a garden and my own movies, black and white ones that don't need explaining." She'd chuckle, but the laughter never reached her voice. Then came the papers. It was a sunny Tuesday when she arrived with a folder in her hand. I was baking apple pie, the smell of cinnamon thick in the air. Lydia placed the folder on the counter like it was nothing. "It's just some legal stuff," she said. "House insurance, medical power of attorney. Eric and I figured it's easier if we manage things for you." "Manage?" I asked, raising a brow. She smiled, touching my hand. "Mom, you know how confusing this paperwork can get. We're just trying to make sure you're taken care of." Her touch was warm, but her fingers lingered too long on the folder. I opened it and saw pages full of fine print, stamps, and signatures. My name printed neatly at the top. She guided me with her finger, like a teacher helping a child. Just here and here, nothing complicated. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I signed the first page, hesitated on the second. "This isn't about the house, is it?" I asked quietly. "Of course not," she said quickly. "You'll always have this home. This is just for convenience, convenience." That word echoed through my head long after she left. That night I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked too loudly, the wind pressed against the windows, and my thoughts refused to rest. I went downstairs and sat by the piano, tracing the keys like they might play by themselves. The house felt different somehow, still mine, but quieter, as if holding its breath. The next morning, I heard Lydia on the phone when she thought I was outside. Her voice was sharp, clipped. "No, just the appraisal for now." "Yes, she signed most of it. The rest will be done soon." When she saw me in the doorway, she froze, then smiled. "Mom." "You scared me. I was just talking to the bank about your savings account." They had questions. I nodded slowly. "I see. But I didn't. Not really. Not yet." That Sunday she brought Eric again. They sat with me at the dining table, their tone light, their words gentle. "Mom," Eric said, "you've given us so much over the years. Let us take some weight off your shoulders." "I don't feel weighed down," I said. Lydia reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. "It's not about feeling it, Mom. It's about planning ahead. You've done your part. Let us do ours." Her eyes were soft, her voice tender, but something inside me felt a faint tremor, a warning I didn't yet understand. When they left that evening, I walked to the kitchen window and watched them drive away. Their car disappeared down the long road, the dust settling behind them like a closing curtain. For the first time in my life, I felt uneasy around my own child. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something quieter, a sense that I was slowly being moved out of my own story. Later that week, she called again. "Mom, you know how I always say you need to rest more?" "Yes." "Well, Eric and I were thinking maybe you could come stay with us for a while. Just until the renovations are done." "Renovations?" I asked. "Yes, the house. We told you, remember? Number." She hadn't, but I didn't correct her. Instead, I said, "Let me think about it." That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. He was sitting at the piano, playing softly, the notes faint but steady. When I tried to speak, he shook his head. "Listen first," he said. "Don't rush to answer what hasn't been asked out loud yet." I woke up with that sentence in my chest like a heartbeat. The next morning, I found a new letter in the mail. a property assessment notice with Lydia's name listed beside mine. Co-owner. I stared at it for a long time, my coffee growing cold. The roses outside were blooming again, the same deep red Thomas used to love. I opened the window, and their scent filled the room, sweet, sharp, and alive. I closed my eyes and whispered, "All right, my love. I'm listening now." Because deep down I finally knew my daughter's kindness wasn't kindness anymore. It was persuasion, gentle, careful, and dangerous. The letter from the bank came on a Wednesday morning, folded neatly in a plain white envelope. There was nothing remarkable about it, no official seal, no warning label, but the moment I saw my name beside Lydia's, my stomach turned. The heading read, "Property Transfer Confirmation." I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the paper like a spotlight on my mistake. The piano was silent in the next room, though I could almost hear the faint echo of Thomas's warning. "Always read before you sign, Maggie." I hadn't. The air in the room thickened as I traced the words again and again. Property title transfer, joint ownership now registered solely under Lydia Collins. I whispered her name, not in anger, but disbelief. My own daughter. I reached for the phone and dialed her number, my hands trembling. It rang only once before she answered, her voice bright and rehearsed. "Hi, Mom." "I was just about to call you Lydia," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I got a letter from the bank. It says the house is now under your name." There was a pause, small, sharp, like the silence between thunder and lightning. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, that. Don't worry, Mom. It's just paperwork. You're still living there, obviously. It just makes things easier legally." "Easier for who?" I asked quietly. "For both of us," she said quickly. "You won't have to deal with bills, property taxes, or maintenance anymore. Eric and I have everything covered. You'll thank me later." Her tone was firm, the way she used to speak when convincing Emily to eat her vegetables. I felt my chest tighten. "You should have told me," I whispered. "I did," she said, the irritation slipping through. "You just don't remember." I remembered perfectly. She hadn't. Before I could reply, she said, "Look, Mom, I'm in a meeting. I'll come by this weekend, okay? Love you." The call ended before I could answer. I sat there for a long time, the letter spread open like an accusation. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly, every second reminding me what trust had cost. I poured myself a cup of tea, but it tasted of nothing. Later that afternoon, I went to the bank myself. The young teller, polite but distracted, pulled up my account. I could see her eyes flicker, her posture straighten slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis," she said gently. "It seems your primary account has been consolidated under a joint financial management plan. The co-signer has full access." "Co-signer?" I asked. She nodded. "Mrs. Lydia Collins." My throat felt dry. "Can I make a withdrawal?" She hesitated. "You'll need authorization from the co-signer." I almost laughed. It came out as a small broken sound. "Authorization," I repeated, shaking my head, "from my own daughter." When I left the bank, the wind was cold, the kind that sneaks under your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it. The walk home felt longer than usual, though it was only a few blocks. I passed the corner bakery, the florist, the park bench where Thomas and I used to sit on summer evenings. The city hadn't changed, but I had. When I reached my front door, I realized the lock had been changed. The key I'd carried for 30 years no longer fit. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, then rang the bell. A teenage boy answered, his hair messy, his expression puzzled. "Can I help you?" The words caught in my throat. "This is my home." He shook his head. "We just moved in last week. Bought it from a Mrs. Collins." For a moment, the world tilted. The ground beneath me felt wrong, like stepping into someone else's dream. "Mrs. Collins," I repeated quietly. He nodded. "Sorry, ma'am. You must be mistaken." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "I must be." I turned away before the tears could come. My steps were slow but steady, down the street, past the rose bushes now trimmed into unfamiliar shapes, past the mailbox that no longer bore my name. I walked without knowing where to go until I reached the small park Thomas had loved. I sat on the bench, my hands resting in my lap. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and gray. I could almost hear his voice again, steady, calm, reassuring. "You built that home with love, Maggie. That means it's always yours, no matter what name sits on the deed." That night I stayed in a motel near the old hospital. The bed creaked, the air smelled faintly of bleach, and the window overlooked a parking lot. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts moved like ghosts, slow, endless, uninvited. The next morning I went back to the house once more. I needed to see it, needed proof that what happened wasn't just a nightmare. A white SUV sat in the driveway, Lydia's car. I rang the doorbell, and this time she answered. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her clothes pressed, her face calm. "Mom," she said, startled, "what are you doing here?" "I came to get my things," I said quietly. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Mom, we talked about this. You're staying at the new apartment, remember?" "I never agreed to that," her voice softened. "You're not thinking clearly. You've been under stress. It's better this way." "For you," I said. Her jaw tightened. "Please don't start this. Eric's inside. We have Emily here. Let's not make a scene." I looked past her shoulder. Through the open curtain, I saw my living room, my furniture gone, replaced with new pieces I didn't recognize. The piano was missing. The wall where Thomas's portrait had hung was bare. "Where's the piano?" I asked. She blinked. "Oh, we sold it. There wasn't room and it was collecting dust." I felt my breath catch. "You sold it." She reached for my arm. "Mom, don't do this. It's just a thing, but it wasn't. It was the sound of my marriage, the heartbeat of our home." I pulled my arm away gently. "Enjoy your new things, Lydia." She sighed, exasperated. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "I've taken care of everything. I can see that," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was calm, too calm. I walked down the porch steps, each one echoing like a quiet drumbeat. When I reached the sidewalk, she called after me. "You'll thank me one day, Mom." I didn't turn around. By the time I reached the corner, I felt the tears finally break free. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of understanding, the kind that burn before they heal. At the motel that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote in my journal. The first entry read, "Today, I lost my home. But not myself." I closed the book and looked at the small lamp beside me. Its light flickered softly, the way the piano light used to do in the evenings. Outside, the world went on. Cars, voices, life. But inside me, something had changed shape. Betrayal has a sound, I realized. It isn't shouting or crying. It's the quiet click of a lock that no longer opens for you. The motel room was quiet enough to hear the clock breathe. I sat at the little table with a cup of tea and the bank letter under my palm, as if warmth could change what it said. The lamp threw a soft, yellow circle. Everything outside of that circle felt far away, like a life I had stepped out of. I did not sleep. I watched the window turn from black to gray to a thin blue. When morning came, I washed my face, folded the motel blanket, and walked to the shop down the block. I bought a ruled notebook, 2 pens, and a packet of plastic sleeves. The clerk wished me a good day. Back in the room, I wrote the date on the first page and then a line. What I know. I listed facts like quiet stones, house title transferred, account consolidated, keys taken, piano sold, lock changed. I added the names of every person I had spoken to, the time, the words they used. It felt like sweeping after a storm, gathering what could still be useful. At noon, I opened the small suitcase I kept for emergencies and took out the box of letters from Thomas. The shoebox was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a faded navy ribbon. I untied it and lifted the lid. The letters still smelled faintly of cedar from the dresser he built. The first one was dated the summer before we married. His hand was strong then. "Maggie," he had written, "when trouble comes, make the room quiet." Then listen for the true thing under the noise, I read it softly. The room felt different after that, as if something steady had come to sit with me. I read for a long time, notes from the year we almost lost the house, lists for repairs, always ending with one warm line. "You are the light that holds the nails in the board," he once wrote. I pressed the paper to my chest. I did not cry. I breathed. When I finished, I turned to a clean page and wrote, "Dear Thomas," the way I had when he traveled. "If they forget who I am, you told me to remind them through how I live. Today I choose stillness. Today I choose to write, writing calmed me. I copied numbers from my bank statements into the margins. I sketched the rooms of the house from memory, the sink to the back door, the creek by the hallway, the square of sun that fell on the piano at 4. I was not clinging to the past. I was proving I had lived there fully and could live fully again somewhere else. In the evening I walked to the library. The air smelled like paper and lemon oil. I looked up property transfers and typed my address. The screen gave me a date, a document number, the name Lydia Collins attached to mine. I printed it and slipped the paper into a sleeve. On the way back, I stopped at the church. A woman from choir was lighting candles. She nodded and did not ask questions. I sat in the last pew and let the sun from the stained glass rest on my hands. I thought about patience, not as waiting, but as holding a note, a boundary, the shape of the person I had chosen to be. The next morning I took the bus to Willow Lane. I stood across the street from the building that used to be my house and watched a truck unload boxes. A girl ran down the steps chasing a dog. She laughed. A new family had moved in. They had nothing to do with my daughter's choices. I wished them soft mornings. I walked around the block and picked a leaf from Thomas's rosebush, new and bright, and slipped it into my notebook. On the sidewalk, I met Mrs. Patel. She took my hand. "Margaret," she said, "are you all right?" I started to say yes, then chose the truth. "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." She nodded. "If you need a room, we have space." I thanked her and told her I had a place for now. She pressed a bag of biscuits into my palm. Home, I remembered, is also made of neighbors. Back at the motel, I made a folder for every thread of the story: banknotes, property records, receipts, emails. I bought a cheap phone and saved every voicemail. Lydia had left a new one. "Mom, please stop being dramatic." The house was falling apart. "You should be grateful we handled it." I wrote her words down exactly. I did not call back. That night I wrote Thomas again. I went by the house, I told him. A little girl laughed on the steps. I liked that sound. I'm not angry at laughter. I am angry at quiet hands that take what isn't offered. I am turning anger into order. The days settled into a shape. Mornings at the library, afternoons sorting papers, evenings walking and breathing air that was no one's to sign. With each small task, the fear in my chest eased enough to let steadiness in. One afternoon, I opened a letter I had missed at the bottom of Thomas's box. It was short, written near the end of his life. "If you ever stand at a door that will not open," he wrote, "do not bruise yourself knocking. Find the key you already own." I read it twice. The words settled over me like a warm blanket. I thought of the trust we set up when Emily was born, made because Thomas believed security should be a gift. I had not looked at those papers in years. In my documents I found a card tucked into an old Christmas letter, Elaine Carter's number, the retired attorney who used to play piano with Thomas. I placed the card on the table and smoothed it with my palm. The clock breathed, the lamp hummed. I wrote one more line in my notebook. "Tomorrow I will call Elaine." The room held the words the way a good hand holds a nail. I put the letters back in their box and tied the ribbon, not to close the past, but to carry it with care. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the soft dark, listening to my heartbeat settle into a rhythm I knew. It sounded like the metronome Thomas kept on the piano, patient, exact. When morning came, I would begin the lesson. Elaine Carter answered on the third ring, her voice soft but brisk, still the tone of a woman who had once argued in courtrooms. "Margaret Davis," she said, "it's been too long." "What's happened?" I hesitated, unsure where to start. "Thomas used to say you were the sharpest mind he ever met," she chuckled. "That was before arthritis set in." "Tell me, Maggie, what did Lydia do?" Something in her tone, the quiet assumption that Lydia had done something, made my throat tighten. I told her everything, the signatures, the house, the locks. She listened without interrupting, only once murmuring, "Go on." When I finished, there was silence. Then calmly, "Bring me the documents tomorrow." All of them. And Margaret. Yes? Don't speak to Lydia again until we talk. That night, I laid everything out on the motel bed like a puzzle: bank notices, property forms, the trust documents from the old safe, even Thomas's letters. The papers looked fragile in the yellow light, like wings. Somewhere inside them, I hoped, was a way to fly home again. The next morning, I met Elaine at her cottage office on Maple Drive. It smelled of old books and tea. She wore a wool sweater with a pearl pin and glasses that made her eyes look larger, kinder. She went through the stack slowly, lips moving as she read. Occasionally she'd hum, a habit she must have kept from her piano days with Thomas. After nearly an hour, she looked up. "Your daughter was careless," she said. I blinked. "Careless?" Elaine nodded. "She had you sign a partial conveyance, not a full one. The transfer clause never got notarized because your signature on the final page doesn't match the earlier ones. It's legally incomplete." My breath caught. "So the house? Technically still yours," she said, leaning back. "But that's not all. You still control the residual trust Thomas set up for Emily's education. Lydia never claimed those assets. She probably forgot the trust was tied to a parcel of land near the river." I frowned. "That land's worth nothing. It's wild marsh." Elaine smiled faintly. "Maybe. But it also carries unfulfilled tax obligations under her name." I checked the registry. I stared at her, unsure what she was suggesting. "Are you saying I should—" "I'm saying," she interrupted gently, "that sometimes people need to learn patience through consequence." Her words hung in the air like incense. I took a slow breath. "What do I do now?" She folded her hands. "Nothing. Not yet. Let her think she's won. Smile when she visits. Thank her for her help. Don't show anger. Show grace. It'll make her comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes." I nodded slowly. "You sound like Thomas." She smiled. "He was a good man. He'd want you to win with dignity, not spite." I left her office with a folder under my arm and something new inside me. Not rage, not grief, but clarity, the kind that feels like cool water on a fever. That evening I called Lydia. My voice was light, cheerful. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking. You were right about the stress of home ownership. Maybe you can help me with the paperwork for that trust Thomas left. I'd like everything under one roof." Her voice brightened instantly. "Of course, Mom." "That's what I've been trying to say. I'll come by tomorrow." "Wonderful," I said softly. "Bring Eric, too." When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't defeated anymore. Her eyes were tired but steady. I smiled at her, the kind of small, knowing smile Thomas used to call dangerous. The next day, I baked a loaf of bread in the motel kitchenette. The smell filled the tiny room, sweet and nostalgic. When Lydia and Eric arrived, I greeted them with open arms, as though nothing had ever happened. Lydia looked relieved, Eric smug. "We just want to help, Mom," Lydia said, setting her purse on the counter. "I know," I said, handing them slices of warm bread. "You always have." I showed them the folder, letting them flip through the pages. "This is the last bit of paperwork. The trust. It's silly, but it's just sitting there unused. I thought maybe you could make something of it." Lydia smiled, already imagining ownership. "Of course. We'll take care of it." "Good," I said, pouring her tea. "I knew I could count on you." Eric glanced through the legal language but didn't understand half of it. He signed where I pointed, confident. Lydia followed his lead. They left that evening, glowing with triumph. After the door closed, I exhaled slowly, like a held note finally released. Over the next few weeks, I visited Lydia often, helped her in the kitchen, brought groceries, smiled when she spoke about renovations. Every act of kindness became a thread in the net I was quietly weaving. She never noticed the pattern forming. At church, Elaine would ask softly, "How's the patience test?" And I'd answer, "Ongoing." One Sunday afternoon, I sat with Emily, my granddaughter, in the garden behind Lydia's new house. She plucked daisies and asked, "Grandma, why do you let Mom boss you around?" I smiled gently. "Because sometimes, darling, letting people think they're leading gives you time to choose where you'll take them." She frowned, not understanding yet. But one day she would. That night, I wrote another letter to Thomas. "I'm learning your kind of patience, my love. Not the quiet that suffers, but the quiet that prepares. They think I've surrendered, but really I'm just setting the table. When I sealed the envelope and tucked it into my journal, I felt lighter. I turned off the lamp, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the night beyond the window. Lydia thought patience was my weakness, but she was about to learn. It was my power. The morning Lydia called to boast about her latest investment, I was watering the violets in my little rental window box. Her voice bubbled through the phone, sweet and careless. "Mom, you won't believe it. We've officially consolidated all your old accounts and property under one trust. Eric's accountant said it's the smartest thing we've done all year." I smiled into the receiver. "That's wonderful, dear." "I'm proud of you." She didn't hear the faint tremor beneath my words, the sound of a chess piece settling into its final square. 2 months earlier, with Elaine's help, I had drawn up one last legal document. It was titled Transfer of Residual Rights and Liabilities. In plain terms, it looked like a generous gift, me signing away the remaining portions of my family trust to my loving daughter. The clause buried halfway through, written in precise legal phrasing, assigned not just ownership, but responsibility for all unpaid taxes, penalties, and maintenance fees tied to those assets. Elaine called it a mirror. Whatever Lydia had taken, this would reflect back. Now, as Lydia spoke about remodeling her New Lake property, my heart was quiet. "That's lovely," I said. "Your father would have been impressed." "He'd be proud of how I'm handling things for you," she replied, her tone casual but proud. "For both of us," I corrected softly. That evening I baked bread again, just as I used to when Thomas came home from long days at the workshop. Kneading the dough felt like prayer. Each motion carried patience. Each pause reminded me that good things rise slowly. The next morning the phone rang. It was Elaine. "It's done," she said simply. I nodded, though she couldn't see. Then we wait. 2 weeks later, Lydia stopped by unexpectedly. She wore designer sunglasses and the faint impatience of someone with too many errands. "Mom, you didn't tell me about the property taxes on that land trust." "It's a mess." "We just got a letter from the county." I poured her tea, calm and slow. "Oh, I thought your accountant handled everything." She pulled out a wrinkled notice and dropped it on the table. "It says we owe years of back taxes." "Thousands, Mom. How could that happen?" "I'm not sure," I said. "It's all yours now, isn't it?" Her jaw tightened. "Don't play games." "You must have known." I looked at her for a long moment. "I knew only that you wanted ownership, and I wanted you to have it." She stared at me, realization dawning like cold light. "You, Lydia," I interrupted gently. "Sometimes the things we take come with what we never expected to carry." Her voice shook. "You planned this." "I prepared," I said. "That's what mothers do." For the first time, she had no quick answer. She stood there, hands trembling, the confident daughter stripped bare. Then she left without saying goodbye. I watched her car pull away and felt no triumph, only quiet steadiness. Revenge, I'd learned, didn't need flames. It could unfold like dawn, slow, inevitable, revealing. A week later, Lydia's name appeared in the county bulletin, notice of property repossession pending. Elaine confirmed what we suspected. The unpaid taxes tied to the trust property were enough to freeze Lydia and Eric's assets. They'd have to liquidate to recover. The irony was merciful. The house Lydia had stolen from me, the home where she replaced my piano and painted over my walls, was listed for sale to pay her new debts. Elaine called it divine bookkeeping. Still, I didn't celebrate. I packed a small suitcase and took the bus to the outskirts of town, where a modest cottage sat waiting, the same one Elaine helped me secure quietly under my name again. The deed had been reinstated through a restoration clause Lydia never noticed in the earlier paperwork. It wasn't magic, it was patience with a lawyer's memory. When I unlocked the front door, the house smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Sunlight poured across the floorboards, tracing familiar lines like fingers. I stood in the silence and let the past settle back into its rightful place. That afternoon, I found a folded sheet of paper tucked in the mailbox. No stamp, just my name written in Lydia's hurried scrawl. "Mom, please call me. It's all falling apart. I don't know what to do." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into my journal. Not to gloat, just to remember. The following Sunday, the church bells rang clear and low. I dressed in a soft teal cardigan, the one Thomas always said made my eyes look kind. After the service, I visited Elaine. She was sitting by the window, tea in hand, sunlight catching her silver hair. "It's over," she said gently. Yes, I replied. It is. You don't sound pleased. I smiled faintly. Justice isn't always joy, Elaine. Sometimes it's just balance restored. She nodded. You've handled this with grace, Margaret. Most people would have gone for blood. I had enough of blood when I gave birth to her, I said softly. This time, I gave wisdom instead. Elaine chuckled under her breath. Thomas would have said you played the long game beautifully. I looked out the window. The world outside was bright, ordinary, unbothered. No, I said. I just waited until the truth stopped hiding. A few days later, Lydia called again. Her voice was brittle, stripped of its usual confidence. Mom, please, I'm sorry. We didn't mean... I listened. The silence between her words was heavier than the apology itself. I know, dear, I said finally. You never meant for it to cost this much. She began to cry. Can we fix this? Of course, I said softly, but not everything needs fixing. Some things need remembering. There was a long pause before she whispered, I love you, Mom. I know you do, I said, and I hope one day you love yourself enough not to take from others to feel full. I ended the call gently, the way one closes a door to keep the warmth inside. That evening I sat in my old living room, now faintly scented with the roses I'd brought in from the garden. The piano was gone, but the echo of its music still lived in the wood. I imagined Thomas sitting beside me, smiling that quiet smile he always wore when I finally understood something he'd tried to teach me years before. I spoke softly into the room. You were right, my love. Patience isn't silence, it's timing. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. I poured tea, wrote a single line in my notebook, and underlined it twice. She took ownership. Now she understands what that means. The next morning, the sunlight touched the same clean patch of floor where the piano once stood. I didn't feel loss anymore. I felt completion. Justice had come quietly, without shouting, without cruelty, just a mirror held up long enough for truth to see itself. And when it did, it bowed. The invitation arrived folded in half, written in Emily's careful handwriting. Grandma, please come to Mom's birthday dinner. I'll make your favorite lemon cake. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing her letters with my fingertip. Lydia hadn't called me herself. She hadn't called in weeks. But the note carried something fragile beneath the cheer, a daughter's plea for peace or a child's attempt to fix what adults had broken. Either way, I would go. I ironed my teal cardigan that morning and polished my old pearl earrings. They caught the soft light from the window, tiny moons against my skin. Before leaving, I glanced at the piano's empty corner, where sunlight spilled like memory. Wish me grace, Thomas, I whispered. When I arrived, Lydia's house looked smaller, not in size but in spirit. The grass was untrimmed, the curtains drawn halfway, as if pride itself had grown tired. I rang the bell and heard muffled voices inside. Emily opened the door, her eyes bright but uncertain. Grandma. She hugged me tight, the way only children still do, with no questions, no judgment. Behind her, Eric hovered near the dining table, his shirt collar open, face drawn. Lydia stood by the kitchen counter, arranging flowers that didn't need arranging. Happy birthday, darling, I said. She looked up, surprised. You came. Emily asked nicely, I said with a small smile, and I never say no to lemon cake. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, then vanished. Well, let's eat before it gets cold. The table was set with care, though not the old abundance I remembered. The plates didn't match, and the silverware was slightly tarnished, but Emily had lit 2 candles, their flames trembling between us like nervous hearts. Dinner began quietly. Eric poured wine with stiff politeness. Lydia picked at her food. The air was thick, full of words no one wanted to say first. So, Mom, Lydia finally said, forcing brightness, are you settled back into your place? I looked up, calm. I am. The roses bloomed again last week. I think Thomas would be pleased. Eric muttered something under his breath about convenient timing. Lydia shot him a look. I pretended not to notice. Emily spoke next. Grandma, will you teach me how to make your bread again? Of course, I said, smiling. It just takes patience and warm hands. The silence that followed was soft, but Lydia couldn't bear it long. Mom, she said suddenly, her tone sharper, you could have told me about those taxes before you transferred everything. Do you have any idea what that did to us? Her words dropped heavy between the candles. I met her eyes. I assumed you understood ownership meant more than paper. Eric's fork clattered. You ruined us, he said flatly. I tilted my head. No, Eric. You ruined yourselves when you thought taking from me would never cost you anything. Lydia's face flushed. That's cruel. Cruel? My voice stayed even. Cruel is selling your mother's home while she was in a hospital bed. Cruel is telling yourself it was for her good. Her lip trembled, anger and shame warring behind her eyes. I was trying to help. Help yourself, I interrupted softly. Yes, you did that very well. No one moved. Even the candles seemed to still. Then Emily whispered, Mom, Grandma didn't yell. Why are you? Lydia turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth. For a moment I saw her not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the frightened girl who once cried when her kitten went missing. She had been kind once, before greed taught her another language. I sighed, letting my tone soften. Lydia, I didn't come to shame you. I came because your daughter wanted family at her table. Tears welled in her eyes. I've lost everything, Mom. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. Not everything. You still have a chance to remember who you were before money taught you to measure love. Her breath caught. You really forgive me? I looked at her, steady. Forgiveness isn't a gift, Lydia. It's a mirror. You look into it, and you decide if you can face what you see. She looked down, silent. Eric stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. This is ridiculous, he muttered, grabbing his coat. I'm not sitting here for a lecture. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The room was suddenly still again, the air lighter for his absence. Lydia sat frozen, tears slipping quietly down her face. Emily stood and wrapped her arms around her mother. It's okay, Mom, she whispered. Grandma's not mad. She's just brave. I smiled faintly. Brave wasn't the word I would have chosen. Tired, perhaps, or simply finished. After a moment I rose and began clearing the plates. Lydia tried to stop me. Please, sit. Let me... No, I said gently. You've done enough serving for one lifetime. Let me help clean. We washed dishes side by side, the rhythm familiar but changed. The sound of water and porcelain filled the silence where resentment used to live. When we were done, I reached for my cardigan. Emily, thank you for dinner. The cake was perfect. She beamed. Will you come again next week? We'll see, I said, brushing her cheek. Good things take time. At the door, Lydia stopped me. Mom, she said quietly, how did you know it would all fall apart? I looked at her for a long moment. Because lies always do. They're built on borrowed time. She nodded, unable to meet my gaze. You always make things sound like lessons. They are, I said softly. You just weren't ready to learn them before. She looked up finally, her face raw with something new, maybe humility, maybe the start of peace. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I smiled. Then begin there. I walked out into the night. The air was cool, the moon full, lighting the path home. Behind me, through the window, I saw Lydia hugging Emily, her shoulders shaking. Perhaps, I thought, redemption often begins where pride ends. As I reached the corner, my phone buzzed, a message from Elaine. How was the dinner? I typed back. Balanced. Finally balanced. Then I tucked the phone away, lifted my face to the wind, and let the quiet fill me. For the first time in years, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. Somewhere I could almost hear Thomas's piano again, soft, steady, like a benediction. Justice had already been served. Tonight was only the grace that follows. Spring arrived softly that year, almost shyly, as though the earth itself knew it was stepping into a space that needed gentleness. The first thing I did after moving back into the house was open every window. The air carried the scent of damp soil and new beginnings. Dust rose in the sunlight, swirling like ghosts that had waited too long to leave. The garden was overgrown, wild with weeds and stubborn grass, but underneath it all, the roses Thomas planted still lived. Their roots had survived the seasons of neglect. That morning, I knelt in the dirt, pulled on my gloves, and began trimming away the dead stems. Each cut felt like releasing a memory. The thorns nicked my fingers once or twice, but I didn't mind. Some things still had to sting before they healed. Inside, the rooms were quiet, but not empty anymore. The old clock above the mantel still ticked, a heartbeat for the home that had outlasted betrayal. I placed Thomas's portrait back on the wall, right where it used to hang. His eyes, warm and steady, seemed to follow the light again. That afternoon the mail arrived. Among the envelopes was one with no return address, only my name written in Lydia's familiar handwriting. I sat by the window before opening it, letting the sound of birds fill the silence. "Mom," the letter began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I see everything now. I was blind with wanting more, wanting control. You tried to teach me what love looks like, and I turned it into a transaction. I'm sorry, I really am." She'd written more, details about Eric leaving, about selling what little remained, about finding a small apartment near the school where Emily was enrolled. At the end, she'd added, "I hope one day I can grow a garden like yours. Maybe that's how healing starts." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my journal, next to the others. I didn't write back. Some answers are better given through time, not words. The following weekend, Emily came to visit. She wore muddy sneakers and a bright yellow scarf, the same color as the marigolds she carried. "For your garden," she said. "Mom says they keep away bad luck." I smiled. "They keep away pests, too. Both kinds." We've planted the flowers together, our hands deep in the soil. She chattered about school, her friends, and how her mother was trying to cook again. I listened, nodding. Every few moments, she'd look up and smile as if checking that I was really there. When we finished, the marigolds stood like little suns among the roses. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you mad at Mom?" I looked at the garden, the sunlight glinting off the leaves. "No," I said. "I was sad for her. But sadness passes if you let it. Will she be okay?" "She will," I said softly. "She just has to learn how to plant again." Emily nodded thoughtfully, then ran inside to wash her hands. I stayed outside a while longer, watching the breeze ripple through the garden. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt presence, of soil, sunlight, breath, and something that had been missing, peace. Later that evening, I brewed chamomile tea and sat on the porch, notebook on my lap. I wrote just a single line. "Justice isn't about winning. It's about restoring what should have never been broken." The next morning, I walked down the familiar path toward the front gate. The roses were blooming, deep crimson, soft pink, even a stubborn white one I thought had died long ago. I clipped a few and arranged them in a vase for the mantel. When I placed them beside Thomas's portrait, I swear the house seemed to exhale. The phone rang once that afternoon. Lydia again. This time her voice was steadier. "Mom," she said, "Emily told me the roses are back." "They are. I'd like to see them someday." "You will," I said gently, "when you're ready." There was a long pause, and then she whispered, "Thank you." After she hung up, I looked outside. The garden shimmered under the golden light of late afternoon. The marigolds caught the sun like little lanterns, standing guard around the roses. I closed my eyes and listened. Birds, wind, distant laughter from the street. The kind of ordinary music that fills a healed home. I realized then that revenge had never been the goal. Restoration had, the kind that comes not from punishing others, but from reclaiming yourself. That night, I wrote again in my journal. They took what I owned, but not who I was, and now, piece by piece, I've taken myself back. When I set the pen down, I felt Thomas beside me again, not in sorrow this time, but in quiet pride. The house was whole. I was whole. The garden outside rustled softly, alive with the rhythm of second chances. The morning light spilled through the lace curtains, warm and forgiving. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the steam twist and fade. The roses outside swayed gently, their petals catching the sun like old friends waving from another life. It had been months since the dinner, since the letter, since the storm finally passed. The silence that filled my days now wasn't loneliness, it was peace. The kind that only comes after you've stopped waiting for apologies and started listening to your own heart again. I sometimes wonder what people imagine when they hear the word revenge. Fire, shouting, punishment. But mine didn't look like that. It looked like stillness, like patience holding its breath until truth showed its face. They say patience is weakness, but I've learned it's the strongest thing a woman can carry. It's heavy, yes, but it doesn't break you. It teaches you how to bend with grace instead of shattering with rage. Every Wednesday morning, I walk to the community center 2 blocks away. The sign outside reads, "The Davis Foundation for Dignity and Renewal." Elaine helped me set it up months ago, using the funds I recovered from the trust. The center helps older women, those left behind, dismissed, or taken advantage of by their own families, women like me who once believed kindness was protection. Inside, the air smells of coffee and hope. Volunteers chatter softly as they sort through boxes of donated clothes and handwritten letters. On one wall hangs a framed quote Thomas used to say, "Whenever I lost faith in people, a house can be rebuilt. A heart must be replanted." Some mornings, when I see the women laughing together, gray heads bent close, eyes alive again, I feel that same replanting inside myself. One afternoon, I sat in the small garden behind the center, pruning a rose bush. A woman named Nora joined me. Quiet at first. Her husband had left her after 40 years of marriage. "I wish I could stop hating him," she said finally. "But I can't." I handed her a pair of gloves. "Then start by planting something," I told her. "Not to forget him, but to remind yourself you can still grow." She looked at me, puzzled, then smiled faintly. "You sound like you've done this before." I nodded. Hate dries the roots. Patience waters them. Later, when she left, she said she'd start a garden of her own. Small words, but I could hear the shift. That's how healing begins, in quiet corners, not grand declarations. That evening, I walked home as the sun dipped low, painting everything in gold. The neighborhood children were drawing on the sidewalk with chalk, their laughter echoing off the fences. I thought about Emily and how her voice had changed when she called me last week, softer, older. "Mom's getting better," she'd said. She even started volunteering at the school again. I'd smiled. "Good. Tell her the roses are blooming early this year." When I reached my porch, I paused at the gate. The garden glowed in the dying light, roses, marigolds, violets, all moving in the same slow rhythm. I could hear Thomas's piano in my memory, those same gentle notes that once filled this house. For years, I thought I'd never hear them again. Now I realized they'd been with me all along, playing quietly beneath the noise of hurt and disappointment, waiting for the day I'd finally listen. Inside, I made myself tea and sat at the table where so much had begun, the same table where Lydia once signed away what wasn't hers, and where I now signed checks to help others start again. Life, it seems, has a way of circling back, polishing its lessons until they shine. I opened my journal, the pages thick with ink and memory. On the very last one I wrote, "If they leave you when you're weakest, don't chase them. Let life teach them what your words couldn't. Because life always does, it just takes its time." I closed the book gently, feeling the weight of every page beneath my hands. It wasn't the weight of pain anymore. It was the weight of patience, earned, carried, and finally set down. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, slow, steady, certain. I rose, poured the last of my tea into the sink, and turned off the light. As I stepped out onto the porch, the night air met me like an embrace. The garden shimmered under the moonlight, each petal a small testament to survival. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Thomas. I finally understand." The roses nodded in the breeze as if they, too, had been waiting for this moment. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. I felt like someone who had arrived,